You're listening to the Wilmac Wire, the podcast that's designed to give you a glimpse into a growing SaaS company, specifically in the realm of customer interaction technology. From customer experience to data management, we'll talk about it here. Thank you for tuning in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Wilmac Wire. Now, this is a bonus episode because we recently hosted a webinar on January 23rd that was titled Transforming Contact Center Data Management, Compliance Made Simple. And we hosted this webinar in collaboration with the Greater Toronto Area Contact Center Community, or GTACC for short. So thank you to the GTACC community for their collaboration on this webinar, and thank you to Charlie and Ben from Wilmac who presented with me as I moderated. So like I said, this episode might sound a little bit different because it was a webinar. It was more visual. We had a presentation and went through slides, did some Q&A. So you can find the full video recording on our website if you want to check that out. And that's www.wilmactech.com. Thanks for tuning into the Wilmac Wire, and I hope you enjoy this bonus episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. You have successfully joined Transforming Contact Center Data Management, Compliance Made Simple. My name is Emily Miller from Wilmac Technologies, and I will be moderating the conversation today. Before we get into some high quality content, I have to get through my little housekeeping spiel that is said at the beginning of every webinar, but just so you're all aware. All participants have been muted. For questions and comments, you will find a menu somewhere on your screen where you can enter questions and comments throughout the webinar. After we discuss the challenges, we're going to introduce the speakers, talk through the challenges, and then we're going to have Q&A, and then we're going to have a short segment after that. So make sure to stick around for that whole time. You can submit questions and comments throughout the entire time you're in the webinar, though. I wanted to note that so you know if we don't get to your question today, someone on our team will reach out to you personally afterwards and answer that for you. I will also note that in your menu, there are multiple free resources available for you to download. You can download those at any time while you're in the webinar. That includes our most recent ebook, infographic, one-pagers, case studies on these challenges that we're chatting about today. I do want to thank Sangeeta and the GTACC community, the Greater Toronto Area Contact Center Association, for co-sponsoring this webinar for us, or with us, and being a partner. So thank you to the GTACC community and shout out to them. So let's jump into our speakers. First of which is Ben Bowen, our Director of Sales Operations, and along with him is Charlie Snedden, our sales engineer and WFO specialist. WFO specialist is not formally in his title, but is something I believe wholeheartedly. So thank you both for joining us today. So now getting more into the content of what we'll be chatting about. There's a lot of contact center and data management leaders on this call today. So we're going to be discussing 4 common challenges that we've seen leaders like you struggle with when it comes to your customer interaction data, your call recordings, your emails, your web chats, screen recordings, videos, all that good stuff that's going in and out of your communications center. I'm sure you're all dealing with a lot of these every day. Now I'm going to add some complexity to that situation, and you add on, say, a retention period, a retention regulation on that customer interaction data. You have to maintain this data for compliance. Your life has become a little bit more complicated now. So we've seen our customers dealing with these situations for over 20 years now. So that's why we were asked to talk about it today. I will also note that we have a nice little bonus challenge that we're gonna chat about. So instead of 4, we'll be talking about 5. So some more content for you to digest. But I will get started by jumping right into challenge 1. And that challenge is data still residing in legacy systems. Charlie, do you want to start this one off?
Absolutely, and thanks for the intro there, Emily. So data residing in legacy systems. I think technically we have to address what we mean by a legacy system. A legacy system for some could be a platform which is outdated, no longer being used. They replaced it, that type of thing. But we can also talk about the technology and legacy as in it's a platform that's still being used. However, there is an upgrade path, and that upgrade path takes you out of the technology you're using today. So think of an on-premise environment moving to a cloud. And sometimes when that happens, the upgrade path doesn't upgrade your data, it just upgrades your environment. So you've got all this legacy data, old data, stuck in an old platform which you no longer have direct access to as you would in a say a production environment. So you've got to have other protection around that. You've got to invest in the hardware, invest in the storage, invest in maybe extended support services from that vendor because it's no longer in your production. So that brings up its own complexities, not only in accessing the data, but the ability to upgrade. You know, I mentioned that you might be moving from a premise-based solution to a cloud-based solution, and all those calls are still stuck on the premises, but you have to then take that upgrade path. And it's something that sometimes customers feel they're being forced to ensure that their data resides in their environment. So, you know, there's different vendors out there, different types of platform. You mentioned I've got a history in WFO, workforce management. The same thing happens with workforce management data as well. It's stuck in a legacy platform. So when we talk about compliance, that adds the complexities in there. The hardware, the software, everything needs to be available. It might be that your compliance team has rules in there that says that data cannot reside in a platform that doesn't have a support and maintenance agreement. So what you're looking for really is a solution where you can take that old data, transform it from, say, proprietary formats, and put it into a platform that you can use on a daily basis that is easy to access. Ben, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you nailed most of it, Charlie. I'd say, when we talk about legacy systems, that can mean a number of things like you described. When we talk about data management in the contact center, you're probably using, some vendor for capture, whether it's voice or chat or email. And so, as Charlie mentioned, when we look at legacy systems, what we see is it's folks who have gone, on-prem to on-prem. Let's say you went from a, Varen on-prem to a nice on-prem or something like that. Is when people go from on-prem to the cloud. And then even, since COVID and this big shift to the cloud that happened in contact centers as a result of everybody going home for a while, that was 5 years ago at this point, 4 or 5 years ago, we see cloud contracts starting to come up for expiration. They were 3 to 5 year contracts. So we see even cloud to cloud migrations. And this just leaves, legacy systems stood up all over the place, especially if you have to retain that data. Even for the folks that have gone to cloud, 48% of companies that are on cloud-based systems today are already switching to a different cloud. And what happens when you have this, even let's say you've gone from, an on-prem world to a CCaaS, which is great because it gives you omnichannel. Now your legacy systems, you might have voice somewhere, you might have email somewhere else, you might have chat somewhere else. And so how do you manage all that? If you have to maintain it all for retention requirements, it becomes expensive. You've got duplicate systems sitting out there and your resources and time to maintain and manage it all in case you ever have to go get some of it.
I think that dovetails quite nicely into the success story that I want to share with the team here. They have, in this particular case, is a customer of ours, Securian. They moved into a cloud-based CCaaS environment, but they still had their legacy calls. They had 8 million or so calls stuck in this legacy platform, and they were coming to the end of the maintenance. They needed to shut it down to maintain compliance because they couldn't run on aging hardware, that type of thing. And they also needed to keep their calls for like 7 years. They transitioned over to NICE CX1, but they also needed to do something with this old data. They needed to protect it, ring fence it, and make it more, I'm going to say, more productive, more production type, because you needed access to it in case of litigation or references to old contracts, that type of thing. So we helped them. We helped them extract the data from their legacy platform, convert it into a usable format, which was the Genesis recordings into a WAV MP3 format, and that provided them access to those calls, so those recordings that they couldn't get access to if they'd shut down the platform. What we're also helping with them today as well with CCaaS environment is to take out their existing interactions from CCaaS, so the call recordings that are happening today, so not legacy data, production data, and producing that into a single pane of glass so they can look back through their historical calls and the calls they're receiving today. More importantly, going forward, they'll begin to use that platform for other interactions such as emails, chat, that type of thing. So we've taken them from a place where the legacy hardware was aging out. They had to get rid of it. They had to move their calls to now a more kind of supported environment where any user can access their data.
Great. Thanks for digging into that story, Charlie. It's a really prevalent issue that a lot, I mean, you transition technology. What do you do with the old stuff? Like you said, you talk about the technology transition. What about the data transition?
Mhm.
So I just want to reiterate those takeaways from this challenge and for our listeners today. One, try not to stick to that status quo by maintaining your legacy system. Try to figure out a way to get your data out of there. Second to that, determine what use you want out of this data. Is it simply for compliance? Do you just need to keep it and comply with that retention period, or are there AI and analytics opportunities that you can put this data through? Those are two key takeaways to help you navigate this challenge. Moving into challenge number 2, to keep the ball rolling. This challenge is data locked in proprietary and encrypted formats. So Ben, I'll let you start with this one.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Emily. And I think of the 4 and now 5 challenges that we're talking about today, this is probably the one that is most prevalent that we come across. It's the one that we probably hear the most challenges and complaints around, right? So if you've had legacy systems doing recording and capture, especially in an on-prem world, a lot of times that data or those call recordings are stored in a proprietary or encrypted format. And our opinion is, look, it's your data, right? You should have it, you should own it, you should be able to use it as you see fit. And if it's locked in a vendor proprietary format, you really don't have it, you don't own it, you can't use it, you don't really have access to it except if you're going through that specific system. So in this day and age, I'm sure we've all seen those commercials with Matthew McConaughey for Salesforce where it's like, hey, data is new gold. Yeah, we get it. Data is very valuable, right? People are using it for business intelligence every day. If you have some of your legacy data locked in proprietary formats, and especially if you have retention requirements and you're looking at years worth of data, right? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. We've seen folks with indefinite where there's 20 plus years of data sitting there. That's the data that's gold from a customer interaction standpoint. And how do you improve customer experience? Because you can take all of that sitting there and load it into these new AI tools that are available, to help improve customer experience and better business outcomes. So when you have that data locked up, it's really hard to leverage it. Charlie?
Yeah, I was just thinking. I was actually pondering on the last challenge, but the proprietary data is funny you should mention that. Just today, I was speaking to a customer who exited a platform several years ago, and they've got their data. They were given their data, it was fine, but they've came to play that, and they can't. They can't get access to it, not because it's encrypted, but because it's in a proprietary format. So we're having to work through that data with them and convert it from the proprietary format into an open wave format so they can listen to those interactions. But more importantly, we're helping them piece together the metadata. The metadata or the unstructured data they had with that came in like a large CSV or an Excel file, which is great if you want to search it, but what can you do with it? And they're now beginning to look to split that data off. So the proprietary audio and the metadata is kind of key, and you need something. You need to be able to use a tool which makes it accessible, and we've definitely helped them with that. I think, just using that as an example as well, we could maybe move on to the success story with regards to proprietary. We're looking at a company here called Convera. Convera was splitting from another part of the organization, Western Union, but they had over 219 million calls. As I mentioned with the metadata, some of it was easily identifiable as Convera, and some of it was easily identified as Western Union, but they didn't have the appropriate tool set to split that down. So as well as taking the audio, converting it into a usable format, we're able to help them massage the metadata so they could physically separate those two types of calls, so the organizational types of calls. So not only can you put the calls into a single platform, but then you can begin to divide that data. And you mentioned, Ben, dropping this into AI tools for analysis, analytics, that type of thing. Having that data allows you to identify which calls you want to process. So
Mhm.
I think, when we talk about Convera, though, even though that was a divestiture and they had 219 million calls, which isn't a small amount of calls by any means, they were able to exit their existing telephony recording platform and save money whilst they were doing that. So that we completed the data migration for them. It was within 6 months or just over the 6 month period, but it allowed them to future-proof their data, allowed them to understand where they sat with the compliance because they knew what was incorporated in that data, but they were also confident that the relevant information with the organizations was given to the appropriate organizations after the data migration.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I think you pointed out that one result at the end about future proofing. And I think that kind of ties nicely back to some of the takeaways from this particular challenge is um, you don't want to be dealing with an issue of inaccessible data like in a year. You have to think about a strategy long term as to how you can manage that data, how it can be remain accessible to you. I always say, like, when I'm dealing with something I don't want to deal with, oh, future Emily will deal with it. Not in this case. We don't want future whoever you are to deal with it. So really, takeaway one: prioritize tools that ensure future data compatibility and accessibility and usability. And then second, kind of drawing back to that first challenge, just determine what value that data has to you. Like, what are you going to use it for? Ben mentioned and Charlie mentioned there's so many new tools out there that are coming out daily that you can get better insights out of your customer interaction data and better serve your customers. So something to consider. Okay, and that moves us into challenge 3. And something you'll notice is that we're almost touching on every challenge within each challenge because they're all so closely knit. So this challenge is siloed data systems. Ben mentioned it in challenge 1. That could mean siloed platforms. That could mean siloed interaction types, you know. So Ben, I'll let you take over this one to start.
Yeah, it's a great point, Emily. I think a lot of the challenges here, they're interwoven in some way, shape, or form, right? You have, example, legacy systems that also have proprietary encrypted formats, right? Creates a challenge. Some of that also leads you to, siloed data systems, and that could be legacy voice recordings. And if you were in the on-prem world for contact center, you might have voice calls over here and chat over there and email over there in another system. Is one part of it. We say siloed data systems. Most of the customers that I talk to and the folks that we're working with, they don't use that lingo. They say, look, we've got data all over the place and it's a mess, right? So the challenge for everybody is, I think what we find is, okay, we know we have data all over the place. Yes, it's a mess. How do we fix this? How do we consolidate it? Is there an easy, good way? Because when you have siloed data systems, they're typically in different data formats. So the content or the files or the data you have are in different formats. And if you do aggregate it all into one place, how do you standardize it all? How do you make it all so it's easily readable in a table and can be served back up to you? And I think that's the biggest challenge is folks don't really know, okay, I know I have this data mess. How do I fix it? And I think that's really the challenge.
Yeah, I think data is it's so easy to be separated or put across multiple systems, and it's just we touched on the first challenge when people upgrade. They could be upgrading from one platform to another from the same vendor, but the underlying technology, the underlying capture, the underlying recordings are in different formats. So you have to have different capabilities within your team to play those formats and search that data. It could be that if you refer to one telephony platform, they'll refer to DNIS. Others might refer to vectors. The language is different across different platforms, but the end product, a call recording, is something that you want to listen to. And I think there's different ways of looking at that. I think, Emily, if you move on to the next success story with regards to siloed data, this kind of ties into what we were just saying because Emblem Health had over 5 different systems, Verint's of the world, Virtual Observer, Five9, and for those who know the relationship between Virtual Observer and Five9, well, Five9 acquired Virtual Observer, so they've got 2 platforms under the same vendor with different formats. Emblem Health, unfortunately, fortunately, they have to keep the calls because of the health contracts they have with their customers for over 20 years. So regardless of what they do over that time, there will be natural progression from one system to another. So if you're looking back at a contract that you took out with Emblem Health, they might have to go back to the very first recording platform they had. So that disjointed data for somebody within the admin team is very complicated to navigate. So we help them. We help them with that by consolidating over 83 million calls into a single platform, so they could join up the journey of their customer through the lifespan of the agreement they had with their people, and it made it easy to kind of piece together, almost like a customer journey, if you will. So it was a centralized location for the voice data, and it kind of enables the kind of long-term retention that they had. Long-term retention also has, on the flip side of that, the purging. What happens after your data ages out? Do you keep it? Do you delete it? Do you move it into an archive system? All these kind of questions needs to be answered. But Emblem Health themselves, they had, as I mentioned, multiple technologies. They decommissioned those systems. That helped them save costs because they were no longer maintaining aging hardware, aging software, and they were put into a new modern user-friendly solution which they could search those calls for. So it simplified the data management and in essence helped them with their compliance, the compliance of maintaining those calls for 20 years, maintaining the data, and also ensuring that the historical information they had was a supported platform. So we helped them all move that forward.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So takeaways here, easier said than done, but break down those silos if you can, or figure out a strategy to break down those silos over a period of time. Like Ben said, we don't want customers coming to us and saying our data is all over the place. It makes it a lot easier for you when your data is in a centralized portal. Second to that kind of aligns with one of my takeaways from the previous challenge, future proofing. Create a system that supports this cross-departmental collaboration and down the line open up to analytics and AI opportunities. So those are the two key takeaways that I wanted to make sure to reiterate for our attendees today from this challenge number 3, siloed data systems. Now that moves us into challenge number 4. Which again aligns with the other challenges that we're talking about. And it comes to be strict retention regulations. Charlie, I'm going to ask you to kick off this one.
Absolutely. So strict retention regulations is different for different organizations, for different verticals. We work with customers who might only keep their calls for 90 days. We work with customers who keep their calls indefinitely. And that's depending on the service that they're providing to their customers. And the challenge of maintaining that is, we've kind of touched on it as you mentioned before, in the other and the other challenges is that if you're keeping a call indefinitely, what does that actually mean? Well, it means that you've got a recording in a format which might have been the industry standard 25 years ago. That industry standard 25 years ago has changed multiple times. So what do we want to do with that? It could be that you revisit your retention policies and you need to then purge off any call that's older than 10 years old. There's numerous things that retention plays into that isn't necessarily visible at the top of the pile. It's not something that comes to the forefront of everybody's thoughts when they talk about call recordings. Is how long have we had it? How long do we need to keep it for? And sometimes when we engage with customers, that's one of the first questions that they ask their quality team is like, how long do you need to keep these calls for? Well, if you're speaking to a quality team, that's typically no longer than 90 days. After the 90 days or possibly even after 12 months, the value of that qualitative call is gone. This is now being used for legal purposes. It's no longer being used for operational purposes. So we need to look at the industry specifics and call those out and determine, what is required by the industry. And sometimes organizations are keeping their calls longer than they need. So having a conversation with us begins them to ask the questions, how long do we really need to keep these calls for? Why do we need to keep them? Because if you now look at regulations like the GDPR, the CCPA, the data protection regulations that are now being brought out across different states and different countries, they all dictate different requirements for retention. But those are typically then superseded by the industry, health records, mortgage records, that type of thing. So we're looking at platforms, or we're looking at organizations that may have been in business for a very long time. they've got multiple systems. They've been kept those calls over multiple systems, and we need to address old formats. We need to convert them into new formats, and we need to make it all available, as we've mentioned before. And the reason that we have to do that is that the compliance, if you are found in non-compliance, and I think, Ben, you've got some stats on this, there is legal repercussions.
Yeah, I do have some stats on it, Charlie. And the fact that we're talking about this challenge kind of last instead of first is a little bit ironic to me, in the sense that, look, you have retention regulations, whether they're from an outside governing body or a regulatory body, or they're self-imposed, right? Like Charlie said, some folks have, they might have a regulatory body impose a 7-year retention, but then we see them keep them for 15 years for whatever reason, or indefinitely because they've decided that internally. The challenge of keeping this stuff, you're keeping it because you have to. I don't think anybody really wants to keep this, right? Hey, yeah, use it for QA for 90 days. Maybe we want to feed it to AI that can leverage it a little bit, but then do we really need to keep it for 10 years or 15 or 20 years? No, we're being forced to, right? So being forced to retain the data actually causes the 3 other challenges that we've talked about, right? Now you have siloed systems, you have legacy systems, you have encrypted or proprietary data, and you have to keep it all. So it's just, this one challenge here kind of creates all the other ones in a really ironic way. But look, at the fact of the matter is, you have to keep this stuff for regulatory purposes, right? Because the cost of the solutions to maintain it and retain it are far cheaper than if you get compliance fines, right? The stat that I have for you, Charlie, is in 2023, the SEC handed out $289 million in fines just to 11 firms, right? Those were 11 firms got fined almost $300 million. So, if you're doing the math, it's quite expensive to have one of these regulatory bodies come fine you for, for failure in record keeping, right? So the reality is, look, it's a challenge we've all got to overcome. We've got to keep this stuff. We've got to maintain it. We definitely don't want to have those hefty regulatory fines. So how do we now maintain it in a way that we can find it when we need it? We don't have, disparate systems and siloed data all over the place. We don't have things in formats that we can't access it. A lot of what we're talking about is in because of this challenge, and now we've got to go solve for all of it because we have to keep this stuff.
Yeah, and just keeping this stuff in itself is one of those risks, because older systems have a higher propensity to have data breaches or loss of data because of aging hard drives or storage mechanisms, that type of thing. And being in this industry for a while, I've seen organizations move from one storage device to the other, to the other, to the other, to ensure that they never lose data. And there's that kind of resiliency, if you will, on data storage is now much more readily available to organizations through cloud providers or resilient on-premise devices. But there's always still a risk of data loss. Something fails, it's gone, and that could put you in the hole.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Then let's move into the success story for this one, and you'll see it was a top 5 global bank, but I think before I had edited this slide, we had like every challenge listed on here because, like Ben said, it just kind of it stems from retention regulations, So I'll let you guys kind of chat about this success story before we move on.
Yeah, so multiple retention policies meant hundreds of millions, even billions of calls for the banks. So you can imagine how many calls they take on a daily basis. But if they're having to keep those calls forever, billions and billions of calls. As well as that, because they were taking so many calls, because they were global organization, they had over 30 separate recording databases, over 30 separate systems that they've not all of them were in production. Some were taken offline some time ago, but they still needed to maintain the database. They still needed to maintain the recording storage and such like. And it was just spread across multiple different playback portals as well. Ben, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, I think in what we're talking about here, and I think for any large banking organization, insurance organization, healthcare organization, you're going to find the same thing. Multiple systems that have been run over multiple years, data sitting in, siloed and siloed locations in lots of different files and formats. We want to be able to use the data. We want to centralize it, so what this, person or this top 5 bank did, they went and got all that data out of all those different varying systems. They They converted it into one standardized format that was readable behind one pane of glass for simple search and replay. And look, many efficiency gains, many cost savings to talk about here. But if you're looking for like the gold standard on how to overcome all of these challenges, I would take a look at these guys and ask us, a little bit about more in detail how they did it and what they did.
Absolutely. Just saving millions alone on the storage costs. They had devices that they're moving off of. They're moving to a newer storage mechanism, which has its inbuilt cost savings because of the way it's able to archive those calls into different tiers, into different standards. And that in itself, was millions of dollars saved. But not only that, all the aging hardware, they can switch that off now. They don't need to maintain that. They don't need to have virtual servers maintaining old Windows servers from the 2019, 2012, that type of thing. And that, again, saves a lot of overhead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one of the key things they've now got, sorry.
No,
yeah,
go
I was going
ahead,
to say one of
Charlie.
the key
Wrap
things
up your
they've got,
thought.
Ben touched on this before. Now that they've got all the data in a single place, they can use it for other tool sets, other analytics. They can just analyze that information in a single blow rather than doing it multiple times. You imagine if you've got 30 or so different platforms, you would have to run that job 30 or so different times to get access to the data.
Definitely. Yeah. Good point on that, Charlie, because that was something that they had brought up to us earlier on in the process. They're like, yeah, we want to use this data and put it to further use, get to know our customers better. So I thought that was an interesting one just because they brought it up so early on, and a lot of people are just more concerned about the compliance piece of it. So yeah, key takeaways from challenge number 4. Finding a system that ensures compliance with retention, but it maintains cost efficiency. Again, everything is easier said than done. And second one, just to develop a retention strategy that balances these regulatory requirements and understanding them, and as new ones come out, along with operational flexibility. So 2 takeaways there. I'll move us into our bonus challenge number 5, which is one that Charlie, you and I have chatted about a little bit. We've started to have the conversation more with people we're talking to, and that is long-term cold storage with CCaaS platforms. Can you dig into that one a little bit more for us?
Yeah, I'm kind of glad we got this on the table today because it is something that I've personally come across in a couple of conversations with customers that I've been speaking with over the, let's say, the last 12 to 24 months. And essentially, we discussed it earlier, where organizations have moved to a cloud CCaaS platform. They're using the inherent storage. It's great storage. It's there. It's compliant. It's safe because of the resiliency that's built in. But there's also the long-term cold storage, and sometimes there's additional costs associated with this. Not only that there's additional costs, but there's also delays. If you're working with a platform that puts it into, say, deep glacier, which is an Amazon term, it may take anywhere between 4 and 12 hours for that data to be retrieved. Now, if you're having to do a data retrieval for a compliance or regulatory body has asked you for that information, that's a long time to wait for your information to come back. And what I'm seeing is more customers are asking us now, well, how can we get our data back in our environment so we can manage it, so we can maintain it, so we can control it, and also have it readily available if and when required. And that tends to be looking at an extraction of data from the CCaaS platform. Customers tend to use their own cloud vendors for the storage, so that's how they manage it and control it. And we can work with them on that to give them a platform that not only do they have speed of access to their own data, but it's manageable. When you extract data out of a CCaaS platform, it might just be a CSV file for the metadata and an audio file for the recording. If you put that into a drive or a bucket, a storage bucket, how do you find it in 12 months' time? How do you get that information? So there's a number of things that come into play when we're talking about long-term cold storage. But for me, it's mostly the delay in getting access to your data and the costs associated with retrieving that data, because there's always a fee for bringing things out of long-term storage. The reason being is it's cheap to put it there in the first place, but the processes to bring it back has those price tags attached to it. So the kind of overview that I wanted to put across today is that it's convenient, but it does have high costs associated with it. There's inefficient access when you really need it because it's in this Glacier storage, and it can hinder some of your compliance requirements. So the pain points, long-term storage and production environments kind of drives up operational expenses unnecessarily, especially if you're having to retrieve it regularly. It's often, as I mentioned, slow to retrieve. It's sometimes also not available within your CCaaS platform. So once it's moved into cold storage, yes, it's there, it's safe, but you can't automatically play it. So we have to work with customers to understand how they can get access to that, how they can maybe push that information into AI platforms, and leverage the kind of insights that they can gain from bringing back their own recordings into their own environments.
Very true. Anything to add to that challenge, Ben?
Yeah, I would just say, look, as more and more people are on CCaaS platforms, we're starting to, as we talk to folks, see more and more that storage within CCaaS, if you're storing it within the vendor's OEM platform in the cloud, it can be expensive. And I think it's an oversight when you sign a contract. You look at it's just a cost per gig or it's a cost per terabyte, and then when you start to amass data in there, it becomes a little more expensive than you thought. Especially when cloud storage is so cheap today. If you were going to the likes of AWS or Azure or GCP or something like that, the other thing that you're doing there is you're putting yourself right back into vendor lock-in, right? So it's the vendor having and owning the data rather than you. Our opinion, as I said before, you should have your data, you should own it, it should be yours, do what you please with it. I give you one example to close this out. I talked earlier about people now, doing cloud to cloud migrations. We've got one folks that we're working with. They're going from one CCaaS cloud platform to another. And their cost to get their data back out of long-term storage in one CCaaS platform is around $1.40 a gig, which is, it's super expensive. So, you put that data into that, long-term or Glacier storage, as Charlie mentioned, thinking it's going to be cheap in the long run. And then, man, you come to find out if you switch platforms, it's actually really expensive to get it back and something that you wish you probably hadn't done in the first place. So just something to be aware of. We're seeing it pop up more and more, which is why we added it as a fifth challenge today.
Great. Yeah. Thank you guys for digging into that one. Like we kind of mentioned, it's starting to come up more and more. So we thought this was a good opportunity to kind of discuss it in further detail. All right. But that wraps up our discussion on our challenges today. Ben and Charlie, you guys nailed it. Hope everyone's getting some value out of this conversation. We'll jump right into the Q&A. And like I mentioned, if you have questions, feel free to enter them now. I've seen quite a few come in during the time that you guys were presenting. We will touch on a few of those questions, and then we have something else to share after this. So I want you to hang tight. But first question that I saw come in. With encrypted data, how do you navigate the decryption of it? So that aligns with challenge 2. Charlie, you want to take that one to start?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. Firstly, to start with, because we've kind of fluttered over it during the presentation, talk about changing proprietary formats, encrypted formats, but we never really got into the details. Encrypted data is there for a reason, is to prevent people getting access to your data. So it's a challenge, firstly, to decrypt that information. When we work with a customer, essentially it's a kind of forensic-driven professional services job, which allows us to analyze the call recordings they've got, and then use the tools that we have in our toolkit to decrypt those calls. Now, there's no challenges there because we're not using the previous vendor's software to do this. We're using the available tools, for example, the encryption keys that are available within the system to decrypt that. I think the analogy is it's like giving you the keys to your own car. You've got the keys, you can drive the car away. If you don't have the keys, you can't drive it. Similarly, if we have the keys for the encryption services, we can decrypt those calls. But as I say, each job is different. Each job is forensically different because of the data that resides in those platforms.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for answering that one, Charlie. Ben, I'm going to kick you the second question that I see in here. And it reads, do you have a success story that sticks out to you as a big win in solving these challenges?
Yeah, so great question. I think for me, the success stories that stick out the most to me are the ones where, look, we've got data aggregated all over the place. It's in proprietary encrypted formats. We have to keep it. It's expensive to do. The ones that stick out the most to me are the folks who are successful to bring it all together, and, transcode it or manipulate the data so that it's all in one standard format. It's behind one pane of glass. You've got all your old production, or all your old legacy, you've got all your old production coming into that as well. You're standardized behind one pane of glass. You can use your data as that quote unquote gold to better customer experience and things like that. So I think that's what stands out to me the most. The folks that are actually able to take advantage of going and getting it all, aggregating it, and then leveraging it to their benefit. And then look, leveraging the efficiencies of scale of the cloud, right? Putting that data into a cloud or using an application in the cloud to aggregate it all and then use it. You just have economies of scale. You can save so much money in infrastructure costs and resource costs and people maintaining all of that infrastructure and that kind of thing. You go to the cloud for infrastructure as a service, right? For those cost savings and those resource time back. So the folks that are able to do that are the biggest success stories to me.
Love it. Thanks for sharing that, Ben. And we talked about quite a few success stories today. I just want to point out that those were all like great to accomplish too. Each very unique situations. I mean, when we're talking about data, no matter what, it's typically complex. So being able to navigate those and resolve those challenges always just it's a step in the right direction, and it comes back to that strategy, future proofing your data. So okay, a few more questions that I think we can get through before we jump into our next section. But biggest mistake organizations make when dealing with proprietary and encrypted formats? I'll let you guys fight over who wants to answer that one.
I think for me it's difficult to kind of vocalize what the biggest mistake is. I think what the biggest challenge would be is understanding the complexity that they have with proprietary and encrypted formats. Because as I mentioned before, the proprietary or the encrypted format could be from a system that was purchased 20 years ago. And at the time, the encryption, the proprietary format is like it's safe, it's secure, nobody can steal your data, but now you want access to it and you can't because you no longer have the keys to the car. It's been taken away from you. I think that's the biggest concern or consideration customers need to take into consideration is that it's not as easy to get to it as maybe they originally thought.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
I'd second what you're saying there, Charlie, and then just add to it. Look, I think people oversimplify these things and think like, oh, I just got to move this data. It's going to be simple, right? And what we see is of all the modalities, I think voice is the most complex and the one that gets, overlooked because it's easy to move a text file, right? Chat, email, it's pretty simplistic in its essence. You're talking about a text file that you're moving around. Voice is far more complex, especially if it's in a proprietary encrypted format. It is tough to manipulate that into an open format and then put it into something that is usable for you, whether it's playback or you're using it for analytics. So, I'd say the biggest pitfall to avoid is just don't oversimplify when you're looking at switching systems and things like that, or you're moving from one vendor to another. Don't oversimplify the voice. Have a plan for it up front.
I like it.
Great advice.
Okay. Last question before we jump into our next section. How do we prioritize which challenge to solve first? Do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, so I don't think the challenge of having to retain stuff from a regulatory body is ever going away. So probably one you can't solve, just one that you can better manage. I think what Charlie and I see the most is there are time frames that drive where you begin first. That could be the closing of a data center. That could be the end of life of a current solution. It seems that those time-bound changes within an organization are where people tend to start because they have to. Now, if it were up to me and Charlie, we'd probably say, look, if you've got data that's locked or you've got multiple systems that you're paying to maintain, let's start there and consolidate it all and aggregate it for you. But The reality of it is there's some catalyst or event within the org that is driving like, oh my gosh, I got to get out of this data center, and I never even thought that. How do I go get the voice files out of it, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. The time is definitely the biggest factor when it comes to looking at these projects. As you mentioned, exiting a data center, or support maintenance agreement is coming to an end and you don't want to renew it because it's another, X number of thousands of dollars. There's Time is the key consideration, and the reason for that is because it's not quick. If we're talking millions or billions of calls, it takes time to process these calls. So we need to work with customers to understand what their time constraints are. And sometimes we have to help them bubble up what those time constraints are, because they're just going, oh, we're good. And then 6 months into a project, they go, actually, our support and maintenance ends in next week.
Right. Yeah. Um, and like we mentioned throughout it, like you got both mentioned too, the people on this call are likely dealing with multiple of these challenges. Comes down to time. What's the priority right now? And how can we strategize for the future? Maybe it's a sequential thing where we go through phases, So some things to consider there.
Yeah, for sure.
That is all the time that we'll take questions
Oh,
today. Thank you to everyone who entered them. Sorry if I'm coming in and out a little bit. I can see myself being a little splotchy on the screen here. But what we will do is, for anyone who entered a question that we were not able to answer during the section today, we'll follow up with you individually afterwards. So with that being said, let's remake this webinar progress. Usually it's a Q&A and end. Well, we're not going to end quite yet. I want Ben and Charlie to talk a little bit more about why we're sharing what we're sharing today. So let's talk about why Wilmac was asked to discuss these challenges. As you can tell, we've talked about it for 46 minutes already. We're very passionate about it. But I'll let Ben get us started by a little bit more about our history.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. And I think, look, we've been asked to talk about this today because we've been around voice for a very long time. Company's been around since the 50s. We started with dictation equipment, so we've been around voice capture and archive for a number of years. Started with dictation equipment in the 50s. We went into courtroom recording, 4-channel courtroom recording, judge, prosecution, defense, and witness. And then in the early 90s, we've kind of evolved into WFO solutions, workforce optimization. So most of the solutions that cause some of these challenges, the stuff that store, record and encrypt and put things in proprietary format, we have resold, implemented, serviced, and support for the last 30 years, right? So we've sold nice products, we've sold Verint products, we've sold Calabrio products, we've sold 5.9 products, we've sold the gamut, right? If there's a recorder out there, we have sold it over time. And then, what happened with all of that is the 4 challenges we talked about today, we just kept coming across them over and over and over again. And so, it got to a point where we had one large customer, a global bank, saying, look, we're fed up with this. We need to solve it. No solution out there to do it. So, in 2015, we created our own solution that helps solve really all of these challenges. We have the ability to, hey, if you've got proprietary and encrypted files, we're going to go in, we're going to grab them, extract them, transcode them, convert them to OpenWave, put everything behind one pane of glass. And so what started as a solution for one of our large customers has evolved into a solution that we see over and over again that just solves these challenges. If you are in heavily regulated industries like banking, finance, healthcare, whether it's payer or provider, so if you're on the insurance side, utilities, anybody that has to retain customer interaction data, because it's imposed on you from someone from outside, like a regulatory body, or it's imposed in self-will, like you do it to yourself, you're going to face these challenges. And we've got a solution that's 10 years in the making. It's a cloud-based SaaS solution today that can help solve all of it. And it's called Continuity Replay Cloud, and we'll let Charlie talk about exactly what it is and the magic behind it.
Yeah. So Continuity Cloud, as we kind of discussed all throughout today's session, is our toolkit, our tool, our application that allows you to see what your calls are, and allows you to kind of augment all that information, all that data into a single platform. Now, this particular slide here that we've got on the screen kind of gives you a story of what Ben was talking about with regards to the vendors. We've got on-premise vendors on the left-hand side, we've got cloud vendors on the right-hand side. Continuity Replay in the middle there can pull the information from all of these platforms, be it encrypted, be it proprietary, and allow you to have it in a single pane of glass. Very proud of it being in the cloud, but we also have a premise-based solution for those security-conscious environments whereby they cannot use cloud. So we still do have an option if that was the requirement. But I mentioned earlier, giving you the keys to the car. Here is the key to the padlock. Continuity gives you the keys back to your data. You have access to your data, you control your data, and now you can play your data.
Love it. Thank you guys for touching on that and explaining a little bit more. Like both Ben and Charlie said, we have such a significant history in managing all these logos in here, selling, supporting them. Our customer trusted us enough to come to us with these challenges, and it's become such an instrumental part of our business. And it's really sometimes a question of, wait, there's a solution like this out there, So we're trying to increase that awareness that there is a solution to these challenges. So again, thank you to Ben and Charlie for having a great conversation today and sharing their wisdom and knowledge. I did want to mention to everyone on this call as I'm closing, I promise we'll give you some time back in your day. We have an upcoming roadshow, we're calling it, that'll be in person in Toronto. We talked a lot about these challenges today. We want you to hear it from our customers too. So if these challenges resonated, if you're dealing with anything similar, if you just want to learn more, we want to invite you to this roadshow in Toronto in March. And like I said, TD Bank, our awesome customer, will be speaking more about the challenges and how they solved them and are continuing to navigate them. So instead of hearing it from us, hear it from them. Invites will be sent to everyone on this webinar today. So make sure to keep a lookout for that, and more details will come soon. All right. Finally, I want to thank again the GTACC community in Sangita for co-sponsoring this webinar and asking us to present on this topic today. They're a great community. Like I said, if you look for them on LinkedIn, they have a great community page where they share about events they're having and all that sort of stuff. So it's a lot of contact center and data management leaders. So I highly encourage you to check that out if you haven't yet. Beyond that, you can see Wilmac's information on the page 2 to find more. I highly recommend within the next 30 seconds or so to download those resources if you haven't already to learn more. But you can find us on our website or on LinkedIn as well. So finally, like I said, thank you to Ben and Charlie for being awesome presenters today. Thank you to everyone who stuck on us for this call for a full 52 minutes. They're important challenges. We've handled them in many cases. We want to share more and educate more on them. So like I said, this call has been recorded and will be shared tomorrow. When you exit the webinar, please take a chance to look at that survey and provide us some feedback so we can tailor this content to what you'd like to learn later on. So thank you all for your time today and have a great one. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wilmac Wire. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or visiting our website at www.wilmactech.com. You can also watch the full video recordings of every episode on our YouTube channel. Thank you for being a part of our community, and again, thank you for listening to the Wilmac Wire.